we've been at this for quite some time. When we were doing research for this interview to make sure I understood, give you a good picture of what's going on, a lot of people thought, well, we're only first getting into the cloud now. And for infrastructure as a service, there's some truth in that. We've got a couple of infrastructure service contracts. We've got some applications there. We're using it in a hybrid way. One of our line offices is using the cloud as a backup to a government-hosted application. But we've actually been in the cloud for over 5 years because we were one of the earliest adopters of software as a service. And we use Google Apps for government. We were the second government agency to adopt. Actually, we may have been the second government agency to go to software as a service for email, calendaring, and collaboration. It happened to be Google. The first government agency was GSA, and our instance was larger than theirs. So we've been at it for a while. And security was the first concern we've had, and it's where we've learned the most lessons. So the great advantage of going software as a service, which we now do not only for email, calendar, and collaboration, but we also use software as a service to manage our mobile devices. We use software as a service to notify our employees when there's an emergency that they need to be aware of, building evacuation, don't show up for work because we've had a problem in a building. That's in the cloud. What we've done is we've taken the same structure that we use to assess and accredit systems that we operate and apply it to theirs. In the case of software as a service, which we've been at for quite some time, it's actually a pretty big challenge because we're only one of 1,000, one of 10,000 customers of this cloud. So how can we expect to get visibility into the details of what they do from a cyber perspective comparable to the visibility that we have in our own? Well, fortunately, in the past 5 years, the government has come out with a FedRAMP program whereby, on behalf of all government agencies, GSA, in the FedRAMP program, gets that visibility for us. So whereas before I was having to negotiate with Google one-on-one, okay, I know you want to do government work, show me what you've shown GSA, have a conversation, I get access to their documentation. Actually, they were pretty open to that. That worked out really well. So Google's actually not a good example. It's everybody else who's coming into FedRAMP. Now GSA is doing that on behalf of the government. What we did with Google was, in tandem with GSA, it actually was exactly what FedRAMP is about. It was assess and accredit once, use many. So what would happen is you have an independent assessor comes in, identifies all the controls that are in place, certifies a government entity, certifies, yep, that's exactly what they found, and this is the risks. These are the risks as we understand that. And then each individual authorizing official across the government makes their own accreditation decision based on their risk tolerance and their mission. So even though GSA accredited Google Apps for government for their use before I accredited it for NOAA's use, because I'm the authorizing official, I couldn't simply accept their accreditation. We have a different mission. They provide critical services to government operations. We have high-impact systems that protect the lives and property of every person in this country. Not saying their mission is unimportant, but their dependency upon email is different from my dependency on email, NOAA's dependency. So in that light, I looked at what controls were in place and which controls were not in place, possibly differently than what GSA did. So when you see this difference, what do you do? And this is the critical lesson learned from the cyber perspective. Some people will say, okay, well, it's different, so I accept the risk. That's one option. But the other option is to decide, that, no, I can't accept that risk. It's really important that that control be in place, so I'll put it in place on my nickel. And I'll augment the control stack that is provided by this cloud provider with something that I pay extra for and do internally. So if the cloud provider, for example, isn't encrypting data at rest or in transit, well, let's say at rest. Actually, Google does that now, but if they didn't, and that was important to me, I have the ability to encrypt it on our end and control the keys and do that. Some people would say, do that anyway, so you have 2 layers of encryption, like belt and suspenders. Fine. You decide the key to getting security right here is get that independent assessment, get the visibility into what the cloud provider is doing, and then don't stop. Decide what you need, and if you need more than is being provided, then add to it. If you can't add to it, and you can't accept the risks that you see from that assessment for whatever reason, then maybe you don't go with that provider. Under the FedRAMP program, they're making sure that the people who get into the program actually pass some really stringent minimum entry requirements. So it's highly unlikely that anybody, if the FedRAMP certification is at the right FISM impact level, something that your listeners or viewers could look up. If it's at that level, that shouldn't be a problem. You may want to add controls to it, so I doubt you'd ever have to walk away from a FedRAMP certified provider. But that program, plus doing the due diligence, don't just accept the accreditation. Look at, because that's somebody else's accreditation, look at the certification, the results of the assessment, make your own decision, fill in the gaps that you have. That's the key to getting security right. The other dilemma, as we move more and more into infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, where we have much more control over what's being hosted. So maybe all we're getting is bare iron, and we've got to put an operating system on, and we have to put applications on. Or maybe we're getting an operating system, but we have to load all the applications, and if it's commercial off-the-shelf word processing, we have to buy the license. When you do that, the good news is that you have much more visibility over the day-to-day security. I didn't mention that, but in the infrastructure as a service, in software as a service, one of the challenges is to get day-to-day visibility over what's happening. If I run an application either on NOAA hardware or on hardware that's provided by a cloud provider, I can put agents on that hardware that monitor who's trying to attack it. And I can get audit logs from all of those things, and I can fuse all that information into my security operations center. Google does that for their own infrastructure. The challenge when you've got software as a service is getting that same data fed to you so you can get a whole picture. That's something we're still working on. When you go to infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, it's a lot easier to get that day-to-day picture, but it's also easier to be lulled into a false sense of security when you look at the controls themselves. So you look at this certification package, and you say, oh, look, they've got all these controls in place. I'm good to go. I'll just put my stuff out there. And what people forget, we haven't made this mistake, but I've heard about it. Trust me, we haven't done this. But what people forget is that those controls that you reviewed are only for the hardware and the data center. They don't attach to the applications. They're not going to patch that application that you loaded. That web server that you loaded onto that infrastructure as a service thing in the cloud, that's not being patched by the cloud provider. That's being patched by you, if you're not paying for it. So the trick and the pitfall in when you move wholesale applications to the cloud, and not just buy a service like with email, you actually move your applications to the cloud. The trick is to look closely at what they're doing. What's the scope of what they're protecting? And make sure that you're just filling the controls that are missing. You fill in, you're prepared to do all of the work, or basically keep on doing all the work that you've been doing when the entire responsibility was yours, figure out exactly what they're picking up and keep your eyes open, because there's some real pitfalls there. Another lesson learned is that, especially with infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, think hard about going to a hybrid where either you're using multiple cloud providers, or you're back for primary and backup, for backup processing, not backup data, but backup processing, or you keep backup processing yourself and put the primary in the cloud, or vice versa. And the reason for that is that if you run into a problem with the cloud provider, you want the ability to get to have like swing space, have a copy of the data processing while you make the contract shift. Something that people that we've learned over time is an important lesson learned.